The urgent question. Pipe McFadden. Secretary of State. Statement. Sorry.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the Government's response to Storm Éowyn. On Thursday of last week, the Met Office issued 2 red weather warnings for Storm Éowyn, meaning there was a danger to life across Northern Ireland and central and southern Scotland. As a result, and in consultation with the Scottish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive, I approved a decision to issue an emergency mobile phone alert containing information about the weather warnings and guidance on how to stay as safe as possible to approximately 4.5 million people across Northern Ireland and Scotland. This was the largest real-life use of the emergency alert system to date. On Friday morning, Storm Éowyn brought extremely strong winds to different parts of the UK, with gusts exceeding 92 miles an hour in Northern Ireland. Initial observations from the Met Office say it was probably the strongest storm to hit the UK in at least 10 years and the most severe storm for Northern Ireland since 1998. And very sadly, we have had reports so far of 2 deaths during the storm, a young man in Scotland and a young man in the Republic of Ireland. Our thoughts and condolences go to their families. The storm caused widespread property damage and significant disruption to transport and power supplies, particularly in Northern Ireland and Scotland. At its peak, 285,000 properties in Northern Ireland, that's about a quarter of the population, and around 290,000 properties in Scotland lost power. Over 95% of the customers in Scotland have had their power restored. Work is continuing to bring that number down. In England and Wales, around 325,000 properties lost supply, and the vast majority have been reconnected. As a result of the power outages, disruption to telecoms was also reported by mobile phone operators in the areas affected. Significant impacts were also felt across the rail and road networks, with train services cancelled, Edinburgh Airport and both Belfast airports suspending operations on Friday. Also on Friday, all schools in Northern Ireland were closed, as well as almost 90% of Scotland's schools and all colleges and universities. And in England, there were also a smaller number of school closures. As a result of the storm, around 3,000 properties in Northern Ireland are experiencing disruption to water supplies, and supplies of bottled water are en route to Northern Ireland. I want to thank the emergency services, the engineers and others who've worked tirelessly and with great courage in the face of extremely difficult weather conditions. They've put in a huge effort to provide support to those who need it, to restore power, repair damage and clear roads and railways, and I know the whole House will join me in thanking them for their work. The Scottish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive have led the response efforts in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and there's been good cooperation between the UK Government and the devolved governments over the past few days. We remain in regular contact to assess the situation and see what more needs to be done. On Saturday, the Prime Minister spoke to the Scottish First Minister and the Northern Ireland First Minister and Deputy First Minister to offer any support that the UK Government could provide. And today the Prime Minister has also spoken to the Taoiseach and discussed the latest situation in the Republic of Ireland. Over the weekend, I chaired a Ministerial Cobra meeting with relevant Cabinet colleagues, as well as the First Minister of Scotland and the First Minister and Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland. I reiterated the Prime Minister's offer of assistance, and we discussed the practical support the UK Government could provide. Under industry arrangements, electricity network operators have facilitated mutual aid with 102 engineers with equipment travelling to Northern Ireland to support power restoration. Northern Ireland has requested specific mutual aid from Great Britain, not only in the form of engineers, but also helicopters, generators and batteries, as well as wider equipment, including chainsaws and vehicles. UK Government departments are moving as quickly as they can to meet these requests. We believe the majority of requests can be met through either the usual mutual aid channels or in some cases commercial arrangements with industry. The COBRA unit in my department, which has met twice over the weekend at official level and once again this morning, is continuing to coordinate this support to ensure it's provided as swiftly as possible. I've also met several times with COBRA officials to review the situation and to make sure that we are doing all we can to support those affected. And the message has been simple: to get as much help as quickly as possible to where it is needed. The situation on the ground is improving, but it's been estimated that it could be up to 10 days before everyone is reconnected. That is a long time. That is very serious, and we're working as hard as we can to accelerate the restoration of power. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is in Northern Ireland today. He's met with the Minister for Infrastructure to discuss recovery and the residents impacted by the storm. The Energy Minister is also in Scotland this afternoon, meeting with staff working on reconnections. Since Friday, around 220,000 properties in Northern Ireland and 600,000 across Great Britain have had their power restored. Welfare provisions have been provided to households without power. Travel disruption has eased. Most schools have reopened in Northern Ireland today. We hope the majority of the remainder will reopen tomorrow. But the situation does remain serious, and the need for ongoing help is there. There are still in Northern Ireland an estimated 60,000 properties without power, and in Scotland around 7,500 properties without power. Northern Ireland Electricity Networks expect to restore power to the vast majority of homes and businesses over the coming days, and we will continue to provide additional support that may be needed to accelerate this reconnection for as many households as possible. Storm Éowyn itself has now moved away from the UK. However, another storm, which the Spanish Met Office has named as Storm Herminia, has brought heavy bands of rain to southwest England and Wales. A number of properties have been flooded and 35,000 properties lost power, although the majority of those have now been restored. We expect the impact of this storm to be significantly less than Storm Éowyn. Mr. Speaker, I hope this statement underscores the seriousness and the urgency with which the Government is working to address the destruction that Storm Éowyn has wrought. And in the days ahead, we will continue to work closely with our colleagues in the devolved governments, particularly in Northern Ireland, which has been worst hit in this situation, to ensure that all households are reconnected as soon as possible and that full support is provided to affected households in the meantime. I commend this statement to the House.
Minister Mightwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster for his statement and for providing advance sight of it. I'd like to firstly pay tribute to all the emergency services, responders and volunteers who have undertaken and continue to undertake action in response to Storm Éowyn. And we join the Minister in sending our deepest condolences to those families who are grieving after the tragic deaths in Scotland and in the Republic of Ireland. Red weather warnings are rarely issued, and Storm Éowyn is certainly the worst of its kind for some time. But it highlights the importance of work to strengthen preparedness and resilience across the board. I understand the Government will be undertaking a pandemic preparedness exercise later this year. Can I ask the Secretary of State, are there any plans to undertake a similar exercise for storms and adverse weather, particularly focusing on the use of the emergency alert system introduced by the previous government, its effectiveness and the protection of critical infrastructure? And on critical infrastructure, in relation to water, what can the UK government do to help ensure the resilience of the systems that went down over the weekend going forward into the future? Much of the damage has been caused or has been worsened by extensive flooding. I recognise that the government has established the Floods Resilience Task Force, but reports suggest that it has met just once since July. This is disappointing if true, and I hope that the Secretary of State will clarify what actions were taken up as a result of that meeting. As communities seek to recover and to rebuild after Storm Éowyn, many face being hit again by Storm Herminia. What preparations are in place for that storm, and what flooding response preparations are now in place after the weekend? While Storm Éowyn has caused enormous damage right across the United Kingdom, Scotland and Northern Ireland, as the Secretary of State said, were particularly hard hit. It is imperative that the government fully understands the challenges faced by devolved authorities in providing adequate funding for storm and flooding preparedness, as well as response. And I would appreciate the Secretary of State's clarity on what work is being taken forward under the proper agreements to ensure progress on this. I would also appreciate clarity from the Secretary of State on what discussions were held with the devolved administrations ahead of the storm in order to coordinate response and ensure that the proper preparations were in place. As the Secretary of State set out in his statement, in Northern Ireland, winds of more than 90 miles per hour left a quarter of all homes, as well as many businesses, without power. Labour made a commitment in its manifesto to support the Northern Ireland Executive to improve public services in the province. If ever there was a test of the government's commitment to supporting the Executive and public services in Northern Ireland, it is now, after this horrific storm. We understand that under mutual aid arrangements, the UK government is providing some targeted support to Northern Ireland, and I'd be grateful if the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster could unpack that further. I think he said in his statement that there were currently 102 engineers from Great Britain in Northern Ireland to get power restored to affected communities. Can he confirm that that's the figure, and how many more are due to arrive and when they are going to arrive? And can he confirm, given the increased frequency of this type of weather incident, what action he is taking to ensure that Northern Ireland Electricity have the in-house skills and capacity needed to respond to similar events in future? And is NHS England offering any support to the health service in Northern Ireland? Storm Éowyn hit every nation in our United Kingdom. We've seen travel and power problems, along with the tragic loss of young life in Scotland. Likewise in Wales, Storm Éowyn has prompted school closures and yet more outages. Can the Minister assure the House that he is impressing upon his colleagues in both Cardiff Bay and Holyrood the need for them to make sure that local authorities and local health boards are properly resourced to deliver that preparedness and resilience services in their communities, using the record block grants provided by the previous government and the package announced by the Chancellor in last autumn's budget? Our thoughts and prayers are with all those communities affected by Storm Éowyn and with all of those who are working so tirelessly to help them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank the honourable gentleman for his response, and in particular for his tribute to the emergency service workers and the engineers who worked so hard over recent days. He asked a number of questions, and I'll try to go through them. He asked if there was going to be a further test of the National Emergency Alert System. Yes, there will be, Mr. Speaker. I announced this to the House about 10 days ago. There will be a nationwide test, a second one later this year. He asked about resilience meetings. I can assure them there's been more than one meeting on resilience over the past 7 months, and I take part in them regularly. He asked about cooperation with the devolved governments. There's been good cooperation with the devolved governments in recent days, both at the official level. We've had regular contact over the weekend, and also at the Ministerial Cobra meeting that I chaired on Saturday evening, which involved the First Minister and Deputy First Ministers from Northern Ireland and the First Minister from Scotland. He asked about support financially. Of course, both Northern Ireland and Scotland received very significant increases in their budget, and I'm pleased that he acknowledged, in a rare acknowledgement from the front bench, the generosity of the settlement as a result of the budget from my right honourable friend the Chancellor a few months ago. He asked about the number of engineers. My latest figures at the moment are 102, but this number moves around. As I said in my statement, we've had 2 storms, we've had floods and power outages in different parts of the country. The principle that I've tried to instil and that my officials have tried to instil is as much help as possible, as quickly as possible, to the areas where it is needed. And that's what has driven our response over the weekend and through today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Storm Éowyn caused real damage to homes and property in my constituency, and that of my honourable friend, the member for Dunfermline and Dollar, who has a family emergency today, but with whom I worked closely over the weekend. The costs include significant losses to the economy from many businesses having to close on Friday. Around 15,000 people lost power across Fife in freezing conditions. I'd like to add my thanks to the Scottish Power engineers and all those who worked hard in dangerous conditions to get power restored and to care for others. However, there are still some without power on the outskirts of Aberdour, Burnt Island, Cowdenbeath and Auchtertool, including older and vulnerable people. I was closely engaged with many constituents over the weekend, including ensuring that a generator was brought to a care home without power in Auchtertool on Saturday. My thanks also to the owners of the Windsor Hotel in Kirkcaldy and Woodside Hotel in Cowdenbeath, who accommodated people hit by the storm at no cost. Acts of community solidarity like this are priceless in times of need. Does the Minister agree that the lessons of the response to Storm Éowyn must be learned and implemented, as we know that climate change will bring more extreme weather events? These include the effectiveness of the Priority Services Register, reliance on phoning 105 when people have no mobile phone battery or working phone line, and more preparatory work by the Scottish Government and local authorities, getting more resources and support to communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and can I echo her thanks to those who've extended premises or help to their neighbours in difficult times like this. These events can be very difficult, but they also show the best of society through the examples that she outlined with the hotels in Fife. We are constantly learning and adapting from different emergencies and constantly trying to improve our processes. I've been impressed in recent days at the speed with which mutual aid arrangements have worked, but it's never perfect, but we will keep trying to learn and trying to improve as these situations arise.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster for the advance sight of the statement and for his thoughtful presentation of it just now. As he says, Storm Éowyn may well have been the strongest storm to have hit the United Kingdom in 10 years. It is sadly, though, a sign of what is likely to come. I personally am praying for those who are grieving the loss of those who have died, and want to pay tribute alongside everybody else in every corner of this House to all who have worked throughout the weekend to support others, often at great cost and even risk to themselves. Back home, communities such as Patterdale, Fluteborough, Cark, Shap, Teabay, Crosby Ravensworth, Witherslack and Bowth saw many homes and businesses and community centres lose power. I am, like others, incredibly grateful to Electricity North West, their engineers, and the wider community groups who have worked tirelessly to reconnect residents and to support those without power. I'd also like to give a mention to the Commodore at Grange Over Sands, to the King's Arms at Stainton, the Watermill at Ings and the King's Head at Ravensdale, who provided shelter, food and drink to residents hit by the power cuts. Storms are becoming more and more commonplace and indeed more severe, with the damage that they leave behind all the more troubling and increasing. 4 days on, tens of thousands of homes across the British Isles are still without power and transport networks remain badly hit. And so the government's failure at the recent budget to guarantee funding for flood defences beyond this coming financial year is a cause of great anxiety for communities like mine, who know that they are often the first to be hit by extreme weather events, and it strikes me as being extraordinarily short-sighted. So will the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster demand that the Chancellor of the Exchequer puts this right, and quickly? Farmers are our crucial ally in the fight to build more storm-resilient communities. And so would also the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster seek to get the Treasury to ring-fence funding alongside, in addition to, the Elms budget, to support farmers to protect our villages, towns and cities through natural flood management. Farmers are also major victims of these storms, with crops and livestock tragically lost and equipment destroyed.
Chairman will know that there is a 2-minute limit, and all by some 10%. Perhaps he will make it a very short final sentence.
So will he make sure the resilience funding goes to the farmers who need it? And the very final thing is, will he meet with the electricity companies to make sure that the resilience of power lines is increased and improved for the future? Thank you.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his questions. Let me echo his thanks of those who've helped so many over the past few days. He's right that these storms seem to be becoming more frequent. If he wants more money for flood defences, he of course must support the revenue raisers that go towards money. So I hope there'll be consistency on that. And let me also echo his thanks to farmers for their efforts in difficult times like this. And we know that farmers can be very hard hit by the kind of weather that we've seen over the weekend.
Markus, Campbell-Savours.
Speaker, this weekend Cumbria was hammered by Storm Éowyn, and I must compliment the hundreds of local authority staff and contractors who worked day and night to deal with hundreds of incidents of fallen trees, damage to power lines and buildings. But note, many of my residents are still waiting for power to be restored. Will the government consider the eligibility criteria for the Bellwyn scheme, and if it truly supports the emergency response cost, which will very likely run to 7 figures for each of Cumbria's 2 unitary authorities?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We don't have plans to revise the Bellwyn scheme right now, but we are working very hard to restore power to the people in his area and any other area where power is still not being restored. A huge effort has gone into this in recent days. Hundreds of thousands of homes have been reconnected, and the worst of it is still in Northern Ireland, where we have some 60,000 without power.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency was very significantly impacted by the storm, and we were just very grateful that there was no loss of life, and that's why I'm so particularly sorry to hear about the young man in Mauchline, and my condolences goes out to his family. I also pay tribute to all the emergency services, local authorities and everybody in Scottish Power who's done so much to restore the network, and I'll be even more grateful to them if they abide by their promise and get the village of Stirling back on to the network tonight. But can I say to the Minister, the one issue that has come up in this emergency, as in so many others, is contact with the elderly and vulnerable, and having an effective system of doing that. Inevitably, people who had not previously been identified, Madam Deputy Speaker, do emerge. But I don't believe, despite all the lessons from previous incidents, that we have an effective enough system in place to identify those people who are going to be in most need in these circumstances.
The Right Honourable Member is quite right to say that contact with the elderly and the vulnerable is important. The Priority Services Register is there as a pre-registration system for emergency events like this, and I would encourage anybody who is in that category who hasn't used it to register in advance, and this gives the power companies much better information about exactly who is vulnerable in a situation where the power is cut off.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I begin by paying tribute to all those across the Hexham constituency, including local authority staff and members of the community who helped out during the events of the storm. Can I just ask my right honourable friend to ensure that as the government conducts the National Resilience Review, to ensure that the needs of our most isolated and rural communities are really prioritised when we are considering these kind of events, as they all too often are becoming far more common?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. The Resilience Review will be published in the spring, and it's really important for our national solidarity that it does exactly what he said, and that it does consider resilience not only in urban areas but in the isolated areas, which can often be the hardest hit and hit for the longest time when we have an emergency like this.
Graham Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I offer my sympathies to everyone who's been severely affected by Storm Éowyn, in particular those who have lost loved ones, and also share the Minister's acknowledgement of the work that's been done and continues to be done in the aftermath of the storm. And a huge thanks go to SSEN, Scottish Power Emergency Network, our local authority, staff at Openreach, road and rail teams and all the emergency services for the way that they've handled and responded to this weather emergency. Got a couple of specific questions. One of them, will the Minister commit to reviewing the operation of battery backup phones, which are replacing phones that are using the copper network, and whether that's effective, particularly in places that are off for long periods of time, and whether it has been as effective as they might otherwise have been, where they have a power outage. Madam Deputy Speaker, make no mistake with this, this weather event is a cause of climate change, and is yet another warning if one were needed against rolling back on net zero commitments. Will the Minister acknowledge that and redouble efforts to tackle carbon emissions in an effort to protect future generations from the most extreme scenarios that we might face?
Can I thank the Honourable Member for his questions? He's quite right to point out that as technology changes and phone technology changes, that we don't end up increasing our vulnerability. And it's really important that the regulators and the phone companies consider that as these changes go through. In terms of commitments to the energy transition, they remain as they were. This is a big priority for us to increase our energy security as we move through the coming years.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the last few days, we've seen three notable things happen. One, this storm Éowyn with tragic consequences. Secondly, the CIA have announced that they think it's more likely COVID came from a Chinese laboratory than from animals, i.e. they think it's more likely they made it on purpose. And thirdly, the Russians have quite blatantly put a spy boat in UK waters, and the Defence Secretary in this place announced we have deployed a nuclear submarine to surface near that spy boat to see it off. Resilience is a huge topic. Does the Chancellor agree with me that siloing resilience in the Cabinet Office, security in the Home Office and defence in the MOD could be not the way to go in the future, and that we need to think of these things as very much connected?
Well, he is right that they're connected, but if I can use the example of recent days, I can see advantage for the COBRA team's role. Let me give him an example. Requests came in which involved help from several government departments. The important thing in a situation like that is that these are not just dissipated around departments, but that someone at the centre holds the ring, drives the progress and makes sure that this is pulled together. That's precisely the role that the Cabinet Office and the COBRA officials have played in recent days. So I do believe there is value in someone holding the ring and driving progress in that way.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my tribute and thanks to the emergency services, the core workers and indeed the care workers who were out on the ground over the weekend, and for those who are providing that welfare provision actually being provided in our churches of all creeds, in their halls, the Orange Halls and the GEA centres that have been opened their doors for our local communities. The Chancellor mentioned 60,000 properties that are still without electricity. Madam Deputy Speaker, that's more individuals. It's our pensioners, it's our young people, it's mothers, it's children still waiting on their power to be supplied, and some of those homes still waiting on water being reconnected as well. Can I thank the Government for its assistance to the Northern Ireland Executive, but can I ask the Chancellor in his COBRA meetings, did he get the feeling that the Northern Ireland Executive was prepared enough for what was coming in regards to this, rather than simply asking the UK Government for assistance when it comes down? When this statement says that the Northern Ireland Executive were asking for things like chainsaws, it does concern me that more could have been done actually in our Executive being prepared for what was coming.
I thank the Honourable Member for his questions. Let me again echo what he said about different parts of the community that have opened their doors to help their neighbours. He's absolutely right about that. On the Northern Ireland Executive, I actually want to pay tribute to the role played by the First Minister, Deputy First Minister and the Executive in recent days. This is a situation where, as I said, it was the worst storm to affect Northern Ireland, we believe, since 1998 or thereabouts. This is an emergency, and it's a time when people in different parts of the country should pull together. So I was very happy to chair a Cobra meeting and do whatever else, other calls over the weekend, to make sure that we got as much help to Northern Ireland as quickly as we could to where it was needed, and I'll continue to do that over the next few days.
Tulip Sadiq.
Thank you. Whether our constituencies are rural or urban, the destruction we saw last week should remind us of the need for urgent climate action. In the summer of 2021, my constituency experienced an extreme rainstorm. Homes in South Hampstead were invaded by water and raw sewage. One of my constituents, a recovering stroke victim, was left on the street with nothing but a small bag of belongings and is now homeless. The same area was flooded in 2002 and 1975 because no drainage improvements have been made. So could I ask my right honourable friend who knows my constituency well, can you confirm that drainage infrastructure is going to be included in the government's resilience review?
I can certainly confirm that the risk of flooding and extreme weather events will be covered in the resilience review. It is important. We publish a national risk register, and it's updated all the time, and we recently, just 10 days ago, published the latest version of this. Because as climate changes, and in fact as terrorism threats change and so on, it's really important that when we're considering resilience, we don't get caught in the past and we look to how the world is changing in terms of how we prepare and protect the country.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to echo the tribute to emergency services and all those who've been out trying to keep people safe. It's particularly poignant for all of us on the Fylde coast who each year mark police officers who lost their lives rescuing people during storm conditions. And when you visit Fylde, two things are noticeable about it. It is beautiful and it is very flat. And as a result of being a coastal constituency, that means that the wind during storms gets to particularly high levels, but equally the water that is trying to get into the sea from the hillier parts of Lancashire slows down and doesn't leave the area as quickly, making it more prone to flooding. And I've got two very, very brief questions. Firstly, I met with the Environment Agency just on Friday to discuss these issues in the midst of the storm. One of the issues is that the pumping station at Lytham, like many others, only has a funding allocation to pump water out of the river system when there is an immediate threat to life or residences, and not necessarily when the water is already backlogging onto farm and agricultural land across the area, which will cause further risks if that then creates a breach. And secondly, linking to that, so firstly, there's going to be a review from the Environment Agency, and can we confirm the timelines for that, on that funding? And secondly, when will the Sustainable Drainage Systems legislation be coming into force?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure his constituency is beautiful and flat, and he's right to pay tribute to it. In terms of the funding for pumping stations or anything else, of course we want the right resources to be there, but I have to gently say to the benches opposite, if they're going to call for more funding for things, you have to support the revenue-raising measures that enables the government to fund things. You cannot have a situation where every revenue-raising measure is opposed and then come in every statement call for more funding.
Christine Jardine.
I would like to echo the comments about thanking the emergency services and the power companies for the job that they have done over the past few days. Certainly my constituency of Edinburgh West, we lost power in some areas for a while, and school buildings have been damaged and have been looked at as we speak. But I wonder, in the review, which I welcome, and the Chancellor mentioned, he will look at safeguards within the emergency system for people with the alert, for people like domestic abuse victims, or perhaps who suffer from hearing impairments, for whom the current situation might not be ideal.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question? And this is important in testing the emergency alert system. The first time it was tested under the previous government, I gather there was an effort to inform organisations who had contact with victims of domestic abuse, because we are aware of issues there, and we have to try and think through who might be affected as much as possible. But overall, I think this is a system which does have benefits, that these alerts are not issued easily. This was issued in response to a very rare red weather danger to life warning, which affected the whole of Northern Ireland and most of the central belt of Scotland and some other parts too. So we don't do it lightly, but when we do it, I think it is a useful system, and if there are any lessons to learn about how it's been used, of course we should do that.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Duchy of Lancaster very much for its clear commitment to making things better. Northern Ireland's Strangford has been in the eye of the storm, and over the weekend it's been incredible. Whole villages with no electric: Ballywalter, Grey Abbey, Kirkcaldy, parts of Ards, parts of Cumber, Killylay, and indeed Killinchy, still off today with no electric. Trees blocking roads all over the place. No intimation, Madam Deputy Speaker, there seems to be any clearing of these trees, so therefore roads are blocked as well. Pensioners with no access to phone, light or heat. Many pensioners with up to 36 hours with no heat in their house. Those are pensioners, by the way, Madam Deputy Speaker, who were prioritised by NIE, so they would have a priority when it came to having a generator or some method of heating. With great respect, I say this. I thank all of the workers who come out in the worst of the storm and are working hard to battle. But the NIE helpline, Madam Deputy Speaker, what a disaster. 45 minutes waiting for replies, recorded messages. Only today, I think, and maybe even yesterday, it has started to improve, probably due to the Duchy of Lancaster's intervention in the executive as well. So my question to the Minister in particular, has the Minister had any discussions with the executive that pensioners' homes will be prioritised? And that the storm has left them incredibly vulnerable and wondering just how to cope with the unknown. February the 3rd or February the 4th to get your house, get your electric fixed, that is not satisfactory, Duchy of Lancaster. That has to be sorted out. My people in Strangford want the action right now, not on the 3rd or 4th of February.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman is quite right to outline the situation and the consequences for his constituents. I totally share his concern about the prospect of people being without power for 10 days. As I said in my opening statement, that is too long, and that's why we are trying to get as much help to Northern Ireland as quickly as possible to see if we can reduce that time. He's right to highlight the plight of pensioners. They will be vulnerable in this situation, so we're getting as much help as we can to people there on the ground. I do say that the engineers are working under very difficult circumstances here. I support what they're doing, but we are here to help as much as we can to try to help his constituents. And it is Northern Ireland that has had the worst of this storm, and it is Northern Ireland where the focus of our help effort is concentrated.
Rachel Gilmore.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've had a terrible effect of flooding in my constituency of Tiverton and Minehead because of Storm Éowyn. As I drove through my home village of Bampton yesterday, I saw an elderly resident, one Richard Hutter, desperately trying to pull up the drain so the water could come out of the high street. The wall between Withycombe and Rodhewish has fallen into the stream, so there's water all over the roads. And at Exbridge, where the silt hasn't been taken out under the bridges for year after year after year, they have again flooded for probably about the 10th time. Nearly a decade of underfunding at the hands of the Conservative administration, which oversaw a 45% cut in the local government settlement, has exacerbated issues of subsidence, erosion and generally poor road conditions. This has been very dangerous consequences, and we've witnessed this over the past few days. So I ask this question more in hope than in expectation. Will the government revise the funding mechanisms for local government to ensure that villages like those in Tiverton and Minehead are better protected from future adverse weather?
Chancellor.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my sympathies go to her constituents in Tiverton. Flooding is devastating for those who are affected by it, and I understand what she says about those consequences. I know what she says about funding. We have got a better settlement for local authorities this year than they've had in recent years. But to her, I have to say what I also had to say to the Conservative benches, which that all appeals for more funding to be consistent have to be matched by consistent support for the revenue measures needed to raise the money in the first place.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I first of all thank the many workers who work tirelessly and in very dangerous conditions. I watched them on Saturday afternoon and Sunday in treacherous conditions, working to restore the power. But can I equally say to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster a sincere thanks for the work which he did. I know from speaking from the Deputy First Minister over the weekend and again this morning before coming here that she was very, very pleased with the response and the effort and the commitment which he has shown to the people of Northern Ireland. And I think it's an indication that being part of the United Kingdom, we can draw on the wider resources where there's a willingness to do so. But there are still many, many people without power in Northern Ireland, and many people find it incomprehensible, I've got to say, in the House here today, that some of the resources being sent to Northern Ireland are actually going to the Republic, rather than being used in Northern Ireland, where there are still many people without power. And I would like the Chancellor to address that issue. And secondly, for those who have been left without power, an increase in number of generators, people to fit them, etc., would enable people who need machines for their health reasons, etc., to have supply put into their homes ahead of the power being restored.
Chancellor.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind comments. Of course I take this seriously. People are without power, as I said to his honourable friend, and we want to do everything we can to get the power restored. As I said, we've sent, according to the latest figures I've had, over 100 engineers to Northern Ireland. That number will move. The electricity grids between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland are physically linked, so sometimes it might make sense in connecting people to work on both sides of the border. And in terms of generators, we will respond as positively as we can to requests for generators to get the help to people who need it.
Jim Allister.
Thank you. I join in echoing the appreciation of the whole community for the hard work in the most difficult of circumstances of all those who've been trying to reconnect us. I also join in the condolences to the families of those who have lost their lives, including the family of a young man, a young father, just outside my constituency, who lost his life in an incident with a generator. I know personally some of his close relatives, and the devastation is incredible. But on the issue of mutual aid, which is more than welcome, can the Chancellor tell us who pays for it ultimately? Is it mutual aid provided whereby the Treasury picks up the bill, or is the bill for the engineers, the generators, chainsaws, all the rest of it, is that ultimately passed to the Northern Ireland Executive, who seems to be pretty ill prepared when they have to go looking for chainsaws?
Can I echo my condolences to the person he referred to as either a constituent or close by his constituency, I think, and to anyone who's lost their life as a consequence of what's happened in recent days. I have to be candid with him and tell him that when I've been discussing requests for help to people in Northern Ireland, I have not focused on arguing about the bill. I've focused on getting the generators, getting the engineers, getting the helicopters, getting the help needed, because when people are without power, they want the help to be there as quickly as possible.
Can I thank the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster for that statement?
Point of order.